The UK media is massing at the Old Bailey as we speak, because in about 90 minutes from now, Sarah Sharif's father and stepmother are going to be sentenced there for murder, and that's going to happen at, say, about 10 o'clock this morning, after, of course, they subjected the 10-year-old to years and years of abuse. Her uncle Faisal Malik is also going to be sentenced. He was found guilty of causing or allowing her death. This case has raised so many questions as to why concerns were repeatedly ignored by the authorities.
And it comes as the government will today introduce a new children's wellbeing and schools bill aimed at protecting children at risk of abuse. And Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson joins us now. Good to speak to you this morning. Of course, this bill has been on the books for a while, but the Sarah Sharif case, I guess, brings it into focus, particularly those 15 opportunities to protect and save her that have been identified. And I think when you have a look at some of the elements of the bill, homeschooling jumps out in a way that it might not have done a few weeks ago to most people's attention. You're looking at making sure that if a child's home environment is assessed as unsafe, local authorities will now have the power to intervene and require school attendance for any child. I think a lot of people are baffled why this hasn't been the case before.
Yes, absolutely. And first of all, I'll just address the terrible Sarah Sharif case. What we saw in terms of the violence and abuse that such a beautiful, bright young girl experienced is utterly horrifying. And those responsible have been brought to justice and will face the full force of the law today. As you say, we are setting out measures in this landmark piece of legislation that will do a lot more to keep children safe. We have failed as a state far too many children for far too long. It's time that we get on and act. No more words, no more lessons learned. It's time to legislate, it's time to act, it's time to protect children. And making sure we've got clear visibility where children are being home educated is one of a number of very important measures that we'll be setting out today to Parliament.
Now, we've had a huge response on this, as you might well imagine. And what most viewers are saying is that there's been a lack of continuity and connection. Teachers have flagged concerns, not talking about the Sarah Sharif case here, talking generally of their own observations. Social workers have tried to do things but haven't had the power or the time or the availability to do it. There's lots of well-meaning people but no connecting up. What in this bill ensures that there will be better connections?
Yes, I do recognise that. And sadly, in so many of the cases where children are seriously harmed or sadly killed by those that are meant to be there to protect and love them, we see some common patterns. And one of those patterns, in addition to the unspeakable horror and violence that you see, is where there's often a failure by professionals involved in the lives of children to work together, to share information and to keep children safe. So what we're setting out today in the legislation is a requirement for local authorities to have multi-agency safeguarding teams. So what that means in practice is that police, education, children's social care working together to protect children. Alongside that, there's been a call for a long time that we have to have better information sharing around children. So we'll be setting out the process of a unique child identifier, so making sure we're joining up together that information that's held by different organisations that work to support children. There'll be safeguards around that. We will pilot it in the first instance. Right. But it is clear that those responsible for working to protect children have to work together much more effectively. We as a government will back them, both through the powers we're providing in the legislation I'm talking to you about today, but also through the budget. We put extra support into early family support services because we know that many families are struggling and need that support, especially when their children are younger, because it can be a big challenge being a parent. Lots of parents try their very best but find it hard. And we need to do a lot more to support all parents when children are younger and to prevent problems escalating.
Well, here's the question I suspect most of us are asking this morning. Let's come back to the terrible case of Sarah. How would things be different if this legislation goes through? We know that she was being horribly abused and the school began to notice. Her school friends began to notice. Social services got involved and effectively they said to the school, right, keep a very special eye on this child and let us know if anything more comes to light. And that was the point that the father, smelling the police on his trail, basically, took his daughter out of school and homeschooled her. And that's where she disappeared. And it was over the next few weeks and months that basically she met her death, because she'd been hidden away at home.
Yes.
How would this legislation stop that from happening if a similar scenario were to unfold in the future?
So you'll understand that there's a limit to what I can say in relation to the specific case of Sarah Sharif, not least because a full investigation will follow. I would also just add, and I will address the question directly about the difference this legislation would make. I would just add that, sadly, we know that there will always be violent, manipulative individuals who will seek to do harm to children they should be looking after. And try as we might, it is not always 100% possible to stop that. But there is a lot more that we can and should do. And the legislation today, for example, would mean that where there are concerns around child protection safeguarding arrangements, that local authorities will be able to prevent parents from home educating their children where that request is made. We'll also bring in a register of children not in school, so we know where children are, we know what's going on in their lives. But also education has to be a much bigger part of how we keep children safe. And often the reports that schools share aren't necessarily part of a wider consideration of how we protect children and keep them safe. So we will change the involvement of schools. We will make sure that education is a bigger part of how we protect children and we keep them safe.
It is up, obviously, to the judge in just over an hour's time to decide what sentences to impose, and we have to leave that for him or her. But presumably, because we all accept that sentences in cases like this are not just punishment, they're meant to be a deterrent as well. I would suggest to you that you would be expecting to hear in an hour or so's time that the sentences are exemplary.
As you say, these are matters for the judiciary, but given the severity and the appalling nature of these crimes, then, of course, I think we would all expect very long sentences to be handed down to those responsible.
All right.
Can I just ask you just one quick one? Rachel D'Souza, the Children's Commissioner, called immediately in the events after the verdict last week for a ban on smacking in England, as it is in Wales and Scotland. She now says she's working with MPs to bring that into force. Would you support that, a ban?
As a government, we're not planning to bring forward measures in this area through the legislation that I'm talking to you about today. I will always listen to the Children's Commissioner, to others who make the argument in favour of a change in the law. It's not something we have plans to act on at the moment, but I will keep under review the approach that has been taken in Wales and Scotland and understand the evidence and the impact that it's had.
I think we're expecting the changes to take
Always
place
good to talk to you, Bridget Phillipson.
in 2025. But yes, thank you for your time, Minister.
Thank you.